He came to the diner dressed in his best suit, expecting dinner with his son. Instead, he sat alone on Christmas Eve, surrounded by laughter that wasn't his. When a black single mother and her little girl walked in, he never imagined they would see the pain no one else noticed, or that this simple act of kindness would expose the quiet racism, loneliness, and guilt he'd been carrying for years. What they did next didn't just save his night, it changed his life forever. Before we go back into the story, tell me where you're watching from. And if you're new here, subscribe to Harovia and connect with us for powerful new stories every day. It was supposed to be a simple Christmas Eve. Nothing fancy, just a quiet dinner between a father and the son he rarely saw anymore. Henry Mitchell had planned for it all week. He'd pressed his old charcoal suit, polished his worn shoes, and arrived early at Rosie's diner, taking the same seat he used to share with his wife before she passed. At 74, routines were all he had left, and tonight was meant to be special. Around him, the diner glowed with warmth, families laughing, children trading ornaments, couples sharing desserts. But at table 7, the chair across from Henry stayed empty. Every time the door chimed, he lifted his head with a hope he tried to hide. And every time, someone else walked in. Not his son, not tonight. Still, Henry told himself it was fine. David was a busy man now, important, respected, always rushing between hospitals and galas. Henry had learned to accept being an afterthought. But that didn't stop the sting when the message finally came. A quick apology, a canceled dinner, and a promise to call tomorrow. Henry stared at the glowing screen until the words blurred. Around him, life went on, families celebrating, voices rising, laughter echoing. But he felt himself sinking deeper into a silence that no one noticed. Yet life has a way of shifting in moments we least expect. Because while Henry prepared to leave, while he tried to swallow the ache in his chest, the diner door swung open, and with it came a mother and daughter who would change everything he thought he knew about loneliness, kindness, and the quiet ways racism shapes a life. And before the night ended, Henry would face a truth he had avoided for years, one that would challenge everything inside him. As Henry sat alone, trying to hold himself together, the mother and daughter who had just stepped inside noticed something no one else did. The little girl paused, tugged her mother's sleeve, and pointed toward him, not out of rudeness, but with a curious, instinctive concern only children seem to carry. Her eyes locked onto his trembling hands, the untouched glass of water, the quiet ache radiating off him like a shadow. Her mother followed her gaze. Years of working double shifts in a community hospital had trained her to recognize silent pain, the kind people tried to hide so they wouldn't burden anyone. The woman hesitated, aware of how society reacted when a black woman approached a stranger, especially an older white man. People were quick to assume the worst, quick to judge, quick to label. She had lived her whole life walking that tightrope. But compassion outweighed fear, and so they approached him. What happened next changed the direction of Henry's night and his life. The girl reached him first, offering the simple, innocent presence of someone who truly cared. Her mother joined moments later, careful, respectful, aware that one wrong gesture could be misunderstood. Yet Henry wasn't offended. If anything, he seemed relieved, grateful for company on a night that had left him feeling invisible. But the moment they sat at his table, the atmosphere inside the diner shifted, not loudly, not openly, but in subtle ways that carried a sharp, familiar sting for the mother. A pair of customers whispered. An older couple exchanged glances, giving her that look, the one that questioned why a black woman would sit with a white man she wasn't related to. The server hesitated near the table, unsure whether to interrupt or avoid them. It wasn't hostility. It was the quieter kind of racism, the kind that pretends to be polite, the kind that hides behind long stares and tight smiles, the kind she had learned to live with. Yet even in that uncomfortable spotlight, something warm took root at the table. Henry listened to the girl's stories, watched the mother gently guide her child, and felt a presence he hadn't felt in years. For the first time since his wife passed, he felt the shape of hope returning. But just as the night began to soften, the rising tension inside Henry's chest returned not from loneliness this time, but from something deeper, something he had ignored for years. Because as the mother spoke about the long hours she worked, the struggles she faced, and the neighborhood she lived in, Henry realized he knew very little about the realities of the people around him, especially people who didn't look like him. He didn't know it yet, but this quiet Christmas dinner was only the beginning of a truth he would be forced to confront, one that would shake everything he believed about fairness, family, and the world he thought he understood. And the real test was still waiting just outside that diner door. The night that began with simple kindness turned into something far more dangerous a week later. Henry had just finished grocery shopping when his foot slid on a wet patch in the parking lot. The fall was brutal, sharp pain tearing through his hip, groceries scattering across the asphalt. He lay there, helpless, rain soaking through his clothes, watching people step around him as if he were invisible. But what cut deeper than the fall was the moment a man slowed his car, looked directly at him, and drove away. No concern, no hesitation, just cold indifference. Henry tried to lift himself, but the pain was overwhelming, his breath shallow, his vision blurred. For the first time in years, he felt truly afraid, not just of injury, but of being forgotten, of being left behind, of dying alone on wet pavement with no one to call his name. Then, through the haze, he heard a voice, small but fierce. "Mr. Henry." Zoe came running toward him, her mother close behind, dropping their own groceries without a second thought. She fell to her knees beside him, the same way she'd done in the diner, but this time there was fear in her eyes, real, urgent fear. Her mother knelt on the other side, hands steady, voice firm as she assessed him. She called his name, checked his pupils, examined his hip. But as she worked, Henry noticed something else: people staring, cars slowing, a few residents from nearby apartments watching from a distance. Not to help, not to check on him, but to judge her. A black woman bent over an injured white man, and suddenly assumptions filled the air like static. A man across the lot shouted, "Hey, what are you doing to him?" As if she were hurting him, as if kindness from someone like her couldn't possibly be real. Henry tried to speak, but the pain strangled his voice. He watched the disbelief, the suspicion, the quiet racism forming around them like a storm. And for the first time, he saw what she had been living with all along, what her daughter would inherit. That moment, drenched in rain and fear, became his awakening, because the next words out of that stranger's mouth would change everything. The shouting man eventually stepped closer, suspicion sharp in his eyes, ready to accuse, ready to assume the worst. But before he could say another word, Henry found his voice. Through pain, through fear, he spoke with a strength he didn't know he still had. "She's helping me," he said. "She saved me." The man hesitated, his expression shifting, confusion replacing judgment, uncertainty replacing blame. And in that pause, the truth settled over the parking lot. The only danger present was the prejudice he had brought with him. With careful hands, the mother helped Henry into her car and drove him home. She cared for him the way she cared for her patients, with skill, with patience, with a compassion that had nothing to do with race and everything to do with character. Zoe organized his groceries with quiet determination, refusing to leave until she knew he was safe. As the pain eased and his breathing steadied, Henry felt something shift inside him. Not just gratitude, but awakening. He saw clearly now. The world had taught him to fear, to assume, to stay silent. But these two, this mother and child, had shown him a different truth. Because the real threat that night wasn't the fall. It was the way people looked at her, the way they doubted her, the way racism tried to twist compassion into suspicion. In their kindness, Henry found a part of himself he thought he'd lost, the part that recognized injustice and refused to ignore it. And from that night forward, he made a promise to show up, to speak up, to stand beside the people who had stood beside him when no one else did. He wasn't the same man who walked into that diner on Christmas Eve. He had seen the truth, ugly, undeniable, and long overdue. And now the question is yours to carry. How many moments like this go unseen, unspoken, dismissed, simply because of the color of someone's skin? If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it, comment your thoughts, and ask yourself, what kind of person will you choose to be the next time someone needs you?